Today's Chinese Communist Party considers the country's sovereignty and borders to be its most untouchable, fundamental principle. Not 1 inch, as the famous internet meme goes. But the Communist Party of the post-Civil War era was far more pragmatic. Here we are going to look at a time far gone, when that very same Communist Party gave up far, far more than 1 inch of land to a foreign country. The accident of history continues to cause tensions in the Sino-Korean relationship even today. And this is going to be a long story, so I'm going to split it into two. This is part one. First, let us begin with how a mountain became a cultural heritage. In 1712, the Qing dynasty sent some of its officials to the neighboring Choson dynasty to resolve a border matter. The growing ginseng trade had started to attract commodity traders and merchants from both China and Korea, leading to some regional unrest. This was due to the fact that the Chinese-Korean borders at the time were not fully drawn. So both parties sought to resolve this routine matter and put it to rest. The main concern the Choson dynasty officials had when entering the negotiations concerned where this border would eventually be drawn. During this time, the Qing were enjoying the full glory of their power. 80 years prior, the founding Qing emperor Hong Taiji invaded the Korean kingdom, subdued it with ease, and forced its starving King Injo to kowtow in public to him 9 times, among other things. This momentously humbling event and its deep cultural impact is depicted in the wonderful 2017 film The Fortress. So namely, relations between the two weren't on an even level. Korean settlers had already started to settle deep in the Chinese borderlands far north of Tumen and Yalu rivers, the most obvious natural landmark for the Sino-Korean border. Korean officials worried that the Qing would draw the lines far south of the two rivers, which would force a massive concession of territory. Thus, the Choson proposed that the border be drawn along the Tumen and Yalu rivers. The officials' worries proved unfounded. The Qing, for whatever reason, agreed to these terms without much fuss, and that was that. The Chinese and Koreans climbed a very nice local mountain called Mount Baektu, Changbaishan in Chinese, but I refer to it as Baektu for convenience's sake, to survey where those rivers were. After some initial confusion, the borders were drawn and a stone stele was erected. Everyone then went home thinking that the matter was settled. Little did they know that this mountain would eventually grow into a real source of tension between Korea and its massive neighbor. You see, that is because the mountain we call Mount Baektu is known locally to the Korean people as a traditional home of a local Korean deity called Tangun. He descended from heaven with 3,000 of his followers and established the first Korean kingdom. After ruling for a millennia, he abdicated and then became a mountain god. At the time of the 1712 Chosun-Qing dynasty negotiations, Tangun did not hold all that much importance to Korea. But as time passed and Koreans grew a distinct sense of national identity separate from that of China's, Tangun grew in importance as a nationalist symbol. Not to say that people literally worshiped the guy as a religious figure, but more that he started to represent something special to Korean identity, as a symbol of the nation, so to say. Tangun was Korea's guy, a national mythos separate from that of China, and thus became quite treasured to its national spirit. So it is understandable that the Koreans would want Tangun's homeland and spiritual residence, Mount Baektu, to be in Korean territory. But as awkwardly as history would have it, that was not the case, and the reason was Japan. In 1909, Japan, which at the time ruled Korea as a colony, struck a deal with Qing China that ceded all 16 peaks of Mount Baektu and the adjoining Heaven Lake to China in exchange for rights to build a railway into Manchuria. That railway helped pave the way for Japan's invasion of Manchuria in 1931. Allowing its construction boosted Japan's imperial ambitions, and that was why the Japanese colonial authorities overruled Korea's burgeoning attempts to negotiate a claim to the mountain for their own country. This became a bitter pill for the Korean people over the adjoining years, a wound they sought to heal. After Japan's defeat in World War II, though, Korea was split into two, North and South Korea. North Korea sided with the Communist bloc, while South Korea with the Western bloc. Regardless, both nations continued to see Baektu as a symbol of their heritage. And as North Korea developed throughout the 1960s, the ruling Kim dynasty increasingly tied its own ruling legitimacy to Mount Baektu. Kim Jong-il, for example, reportedly, supposedly, or so it said, was born there. His propaganda imagery would frequently have him on the mountain or its neighboring heavenly lake, pictured here. Thus, it became a real sore point that the whole mountain and its surrounding land actually wasn't in Korea at all. And the DPRK, North Korea, pushed the Chinese to address this humiliation. The negotiations between the two communist countries we will talk about in the next video in this series. Thanks very much. Have a good night.